Rivka Esther Bas Mendel. Louis Nishmas Yenta Bas Benyamin and Mendel Ben couple.
And I would like to add, last night a woman passed away, Esther Hadassah Bas Shimon, my brother-in-law's mother.
Oh, right.
We have an aliyah of her neshama as well. It's within the 24 hours, so it's pretty powerful time.
Wow.
So we are now, today is our 4th class together from this series of 6. So let's just see what we've come with so far. We are up
Oh,
to,
come on.
am I wrong? Is this not our 4th class?
Yes. No, I'm sorry. I'm talking to my computer.
Everybody mute. Everybody.
Yeah, that's right. We'll mute everyone. All right. So, so we have discussed so far, we're up to the 5th ice, the 5th section of this talk. And our goal, of course, today, we will see, is to learn the 5th section and the 6th section. The 6th section directly flows from the 5th. In the 5th and 6th, we're going to be analyzing the idea of Chochma, explaining why Midyan is the protagonist of Chochma, and then questioning that perhaps Chochma also has this issue of breaking things down and separation, and explaining in great detail why that is not applicable in terms of our conversation. So just a brief overview. Just a brief overview. This was just 1 second, commercial break.
Yay!
Okay, sorry for the commercial. That's the hazards of teaching from home. So just a brief overview to remember where we're come from, but not too late because we've already taken a lot of time with various different introductory things we were doing till now. So we're questioning this concept of the war with Midyan. We're questioning its relationship to the passing of Moshe. Why is Moshe needed for this war? Why will this war bring completion to Moshe? We're questioning the nature of this war. We said it's a war of vengeance. We question whose vengeance? Is it the Jews, which we understood, but the verse also implies it's God's, and what did Midyan do against God? And that's what we really focused on, that actually their actions harmed God's holy name because they are the concept of separation, which is fighting God. And we spoke about this idea at length, Midyan, the idea of Madon, the idea of divisiveness, dissension. We explained its roots Kabbalistically with the world of Tohu, of chaos, of confusion, and how there, this primordial shattering of the vessels really trickled down to our world, to the nation of Midyan. Just as above, these godly energies could not fuse, Midyan is, so to speak, the human embodiment of that he can't fuse, can't blend. Why? Because there's no nullification. This ego. And that's expressed in baseless hatred. And we spent last week discussing at length this concept of baseless hatred and understanding that it means exactly what it says. When you hate someone for no specific reason beyond that they take up space, because their space, you feel, limits your space. And we discussed that at length last week. And we also gave a homework assignment. So our homework assignment of last week was to find a person or several that you were going to act in a way of nullification, of self-nullification, of bitul with that person. Because we understood that that's the healing, that's the opposite of this baseless hatred. The baseless hatred comes from ego. And the opposite of that is the nullification, which allows for fusion, which allows for bonding with other people. So who did their homework? Proudly raise your hand, or you could have an icon if I don't see you. I got one yes. Thank you, Devora. We can all clap. Especially if she's the only yes. It's been pretty embarrassing. I got a second one. Thank you. You did. That's it. Only 2 people get a round of applause here. Did anyone else do their homework? I did it.
Yay.
Yes. Anyone else?
It's a constant
Lady-
challenge.
It was challenging, but you tried?
Yeah, but it's pretty,
Okay,
Not
try. Listen, we
simple.
get full credit for trying. Trying
not
is full
simple
credit.
at all.
All right, that's it. We got 2 yeses and 1 trying. Nobody else here did it. Like class was over, closed computer, forgot.
Dog ate the homework.
Okay. We need like big signs plastered on your fridge, on your computer screen, wherever you look in your checkbook, homework. Bittel, the initials of the person's name, if it's appropriate, just remind yourself. Because I do feel one of the challenges is remembering. We have so many patterns that we've been living for so many years. To change our patterns, we gotta remember. That's the first, and for some of us, very difficult step. Okay. So without giving any incriminating details, Devorah, do you have anything to share about your experience? We don't want to know with whom, but anything to share about the experience.
I think it grieves the skids some. It's complicated because this person also has a problem with Bitzel, so it was kind of, but.
Not your business, not your part, not your issue.
Right. I think it helped not. I used to, with this person, because she had a problem with Bitzel, I used to give her more stuff. And I decided that's for fun. Forget it. Just smile and nod and be supportive, and it worked. It worked better.
Great. So Devorah raised an interesting angle. Devorah said, well, if you're trying to act with Bittel, with nullification, but the person you're engaging with also has a lot of ego, just like you, then it's a little difficult. Well, that is a very practical point you realized, and truly, that's part of the challenge of the situation. That's part of our challenge. Like how often are you like, but I'm right and they're wrong. Like, like I want to be all Butzel, but they're wrong. So how do I be Butzel when they're wrong, Or I'm doing the holy thing, they're doing the non-holy thing, and I'm supposed to be Butzel. Like that doesn't make any sense, right? So all of these things come in. Yes, they're gonna be doing the unholy thing. Yes, they're wrong and you're right. Yes, they have a tremendous ego, but none of it has any bearing on our work. We have to be like that tightrope walker, just eyes fixed on the goal. We have to know what our work is, and we're not absorbing anyone else's work. We just have to stay loyal to our work. Did you have anything that you gained, any insight or anything that you experienced over your week without any incriminating details? I can't hear you because you're muted.
I did feel that when I was practicing Bittel, well, on 2 occasions, one was whatever, I wasn't gonna like get into proving that I was right. And the other situation, I wasn't going to like feel like I had to say something to feel like I'm worth something. So, and then I feel like I fit into I just feel like I was more of a part of I just feel like I fit in better to the conversation.
So you're saying you actually saw some positive personal benefit in the flow of interaction because your goal was to do your homework and to live up to the mimer and to live in a way of Bittel, at least in this very specific situation. And what you're saying was the side benefit is whatever was happening worked better because of it.
Yeah, the interaction I felt was much more comfortable. I was much more comfortable in the interaction. So
that's great. That's beautiful that you saw that. And that makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense because very often if I say the word our ego, people will think, no, I don't have an ego, but I'll say our ego, is the barrier. And there you go. You got a double barrier. because all of us have ego, and that's just the nature of man. You know, we all have some ego that's infringing on someone else's space, and that creates barriers and creates guards, and that separates. So it makes a lot of sense that when we consciously put that on the side, the interaction's better and healthier. That does make a lot of sense. Elka, you want to share from your attempt? Do you have something that you'd like to share?
Well, some things you just said were like what happened. I guess what worked best for me whenever I had to talk to that person was really not saying anything. That otherwise, yeah, because you can't fix that person, and there's no point in the arguing. So I'm not going to win or gain anything by the argument. But that was even hard, and the one that when I was around that person to not say anything. That's the big challenge for me. Is you do get that. That's what I guess we're talking about. You're talking about the ego. You want to get defensive, or you want to prove that you're right, or you want to make your point. And I like want to carry around a roll of duct tape when I'm around that person. Cover up the mouth. Don't answer. It's not worth it.
Envision, I had someone in one of my classes that said that for a certain person that she was struggling with, whenever she looked at that person, she envisioned across the person's forehead emblazoned the word test.
Test?
Test. This is her test. At the moment, this person is her test.
Opportunity,
test, challenge, bittle. But it's great to have such a visual reminder. You could just envision that duct tape, but you don't want, but the point is not on her mouth, it's in your mouth.
Yeah.
But just like for me, that vision of like, wow, just as you see this person, just remember, oh yeah, God, in all of his kindness, this is deliberate design. Why is this person in my life? For me to grow, for me to become a better mensch, for me to become a more godly person.
Mm-hmm.
Their issues are their issues, but my interaction with them should propel me forward. So if I look at them and think bittul, look at them and think challenge, look at them and think growth, look at them and think deliberate design, then this helps me understand that it's not I'm just keeping my mouth shut because there's no point in saying anything because I'm just gonna get more entangled, but rather this is an opportunity for me to live like Hashem wants me to live. And because this is such an extreme example, it's an easier opportunity. Meaning bittul doesn't only apply with dysfunctional or difficult or challenging people. Bittul applies with our whole world. But when you're beginning to flex your muscles, it's easier to experience it in those situations. It's more obvious, the concept of bittul. So the person that I was choosing is, thank God, a very healthy person with absolutely no friction between us. Thank God I didn't have someone in my immediate world that I could think of that was unhealthy and created friction. So otherwise I would have picked that, but I didn't have that, thank God, at the moment in my life. Very grateful. So I picked a very healthy person, just someone I have a lot of interactions with. Healthy person, good person, no problems between us. But that doesn't mean therefore you're not supposed to have bittul. And still,
really? What could come up that would?
Anything, lots of things come up between two human beings. Just even like you did said, a dissenting opinion. Not that there's a problem. There's no problems here. There'd be no fight. There'd be no argument. There'd be no bad feelings.
Right. No animosity.
This is an opportunity for me to nullify myself. Or I was thinking of sometimes like this is the opportunity for me to give a free favor. I'm just giving a gift. The gift of my unconditional support, the gift of my putting myself aside for you, putting myself aside to build you up. So without any friction in the relationship to start with, there's still loads of opportunities for bittul in the relationship because that's how God wants us to live in all situations, not just in the difficult ones. But yes, of course, if I had a person in my life that was very difficult, obviously I would have also gone in that direction because that's where you so obviously see the need for your bittul, almost like for the survival mechanism. But it really applies in all situations. All right, well, we will call that a success because we're saying over a third of our constituency participated in homework. So that's awesome. And next time, of course, we'd like 100%, but that's okay. So let's continue. We are up to the 5th section of this talk. So the 5th and the 6th section, which is our goal for tonight, is more technical, more intellectual. It's not a voida piece. a working on oneself piece in the way last week was. What are we discussing here? So we left the fourth section with an understanding, okay, Midyan, the antagonist to God's name, that divisiveness, dissension, the lack of nullification, this expression of baseless hatred. And we open up the fifth section by saying, so now we understand why Midyan is opposing God's element or your soul's element of Chochma. Chochma is the first and highest of the 10 divine attributes, the 10 spheros, and also of the 10 bechinos, which means the 10 powers of my soul. My 10 soul powers are parallel to God's 10 divine attributes. So his highest power is called Chochma, as is mine. What does Chochma mean? And then the Rebbe brings Kabbalistic source that prove that Midyan opposes Chochma, because Chochma is the energy of Bittul. Meaning we were just saying that our homework was Bittul. Why was our homework Bittul? I thought we were talking about like Sinas Chinam. Because we understood that what we need to do is behave in a manner of self-nullification to uproot this behavioral manifestation called baseless hatred. And the trait inside ourself that is the repository of our strength of nullification is Chachma. And we see that in the very name Chachma, and this goes all the way back to chapter 3 of Tanya, where the Alter Rebbe explains this concept that the word Chachma, excuse me for my lack of a blackboard here, can be split into 2 words. You take the first 2 letters and the second 2 letters, but this is like backwards because it's Hebrew. So imagine the first 2 letters, Ches Chaf, and the second 2 letters, Mem Hey. We create 2 separate words, jumble the letters. This is so clear. Koyach, Ma. Koyach means a power. Ma means a question mark. What? A power? Did I ask on it? What was that? Koyach, what? That's Chachma. What does that mean? What that means is Chachma is the embodiment of the non-definable, of that which we cannot describe. Because any description creates a box. And Chachma doesn't have any boxes. Any description creates identity. Chachma doesn't have that identity. It would be like if you were, if someone called you for a reference for a person, for a shidduch, for a job, and you would say, someone called you about a maid that you had, and they would say, what is she like? And you'd say, oh, she was very honest. Oh, you mean she wasn't very industrious? Or she was very industrious. Oh, you mean she wasn't very honest? In other words, every word we say about something creates part of the parameters that define that, both the presence and the absence, because the presence creates an absence, are all now creating a self, a box. Chachma's fluid. Chachma doesn't have any boxes, which is why Chachma is something that by definition we can't really qualify or quantify. Because if we did, if we catch it, it's a thing, which is no longer therefore this absence, this total negation that allows the maximum space for God to be expressed. Because however much space we take up, that's the part we're not giving to him. Hashem says, the quote from the Talmud, where there is self, that by definition means there's no room for me. If there's an I besides mine, then I can't be in that space. So Chachma has the most space for Hashem because it has the absence of definition of self. No boxes. Imagine like just a fluid jello mass. That's Chachma. And therefore Chachma is the repository of Bittul, of absolute negation of self. And that's why Midyan opposes Chachma. There can't be anything worse for Midyan than Chachma. And there can't be anything better for God than Chachma. Everything of Chachma, the quality of Chachma is called Kadosh. Another synonym for Chachma is Kodesh HaElyon. We're talking about God. The supernal Kodesh. Everything that possesses kodesh is called kedusha. So if you ever heard anyone use the term kedusha, which could be loosely used to mean holy or holiness, what kedusha really means, if I want to give you its Kabbalistic dictionary definition, is the presence of kadosh, which means the presence of chochma, which means the presence of bittul. So everything on the side of kedusha means it has the potential or actualized negation of self. And anything on the other side does not have that ability, not the actual and not even the potential. Every angel is a living embodiment of nullification. The angel's entire being is God's will. And every Jew possesses in potential this ability. And as the Alter Rebbe explains extensively in Tanya, there is nothing that is more attracting to Hashem than bittul. Where bittul is found, Hashem is found. If you want to bring Hashem into your life, this is the most direct magnet for his presence. So going back to what Elka was saying, or in a sense Yudit, because all of them, it seems we're dealing with difficult people. And you could sometimes feel, but I'm right. Or why should I give this person this beautiful, godly bittul? They don't deserve it. Like, why should I grace them with that energy? Because I'd like to bring God down to planet Earth. That's where he wants to be. And I'd like to bring God into my life. That's where I'd like him to be. And bittul is the strongest magnet for his presence. And this is expressed by God and by ourselves through the power we call chochma. Now, if we're looking at our soul, or in God, we can also look at ourselves to understand this. If we think of our soul powers, assuming most people have a somewhat basic understanding of those terms, we have 10 powers of soul, 3 intellectual, 7 emotional, right? We're Lubavitchers, we're Chabad, Hasidim, we're the brainy ones. Chabad, Chachma, Bina, Das, the 3 faculties of mind, as versus the emotional powers, and then the behavioral manifestation, Malchus. So Chachma is part of intellect. It's part of that trilogy of powers of intellect. Chachma, the creative flash, which leads to Bina, the development, which leads to Das, the application. And that's why we call it, Kabbalistically, it says Chachma and Bina are Trei Re'in Delamis Parshim, 2 great friends that can never be separated. Because Chachma is the catalyst for any Bina. And without Bina, Chachma doesn't exist. Because as I said, Chachma is non-graspable, non-definable. By its very definition, it can't have definition. So therefore, if it's a flash you can grab, you just defined Chachma. But fear not, if you grab it, it's no longer Chachma. It's already Bina. So Chachma needs Bina, Bina needs Chachma. If you don't have the Bina, Chachma's flash is vapor. Like you wake up in the middle of the night, you had this great idea, but you have no memory what it was. That's Chachma without Bina. So you have the Chachma, you grab it, you develop it, you think about it, you're in the realm of Bina. So Bina needs Chachma. There's nothing to think about without Chachma. And Chachma needs Bina. There's no grabbing and developing without Bina. That's why they're such great friends. So that's Chachma. The reason why I'm explaining it is because the Rebbe is going to open up here to a question, which is really the focus of the next 2 sections of this mimer. And the question is, wait a minute. We are saying Chachma is the embodiment of nullification. Check, that is correct. We are also saying Chachma is the impetus of all thought. That's also correct. But I have a problem because it says clearly, I could read inside here, it would even help. The rachis has chalkus u'bilchinas hamaychet. That division, separation takes place in the intellect. Wait a minute. I just spoke and spoke and spoke about Midyan as a source of strife, as a source of dissension, as a source of divisiveness because of its ego. And the counterpoint to that is Chochma, is godliness, is Kodesh Elyon, is Kedusha, is absolute negation of self. But Chochma is the beginning of thought. And thought, by definition, is the quality of that which breaks down, of that which separates. That's my question. And that question, I'm going to devote the rest of this section of the Mimer to, and continuing the explanation of it, the next ice as well.
Would you
Any
repeat that,
questions
please?
on my question or any other things I
Yeah.
said so far?
Would you repeat the question, please? So I can
Sure,
write it down.
100%. What we established in the beginning of this section, the 5th section of the talk, is that Chochma is the antithesis of Midyan, because Midyan is the idea of ego, of separation, and Chochma is the idea of absolute negation. And I spent a long time, I gave you many details in my margin and say, for you to really understand why the Rebbe Rashab is saying that Chochma is absolute negation. So good, clear. Chochma versus Midyan. I know which side I'm on. All is great. But then the Rebbe says, but wait a minute. Chochma is part of the intellect, Chabad. And intellect, as we're told, and now I'm going to give 3 supports for this statement, is the source of that which separates. So I'm viewing Chochma as the opposite of Midyan, but it sounds like Chochma and Midyan do the same thing. They both create separation. Any questions on this or anything else we've said so far since the beginning? Everybody is very quietly, hopefully attentively listening. Any questions?
Thank you.
Any questions? Anyone else? Okay, so we are now going to give 3 supports for this concept that in intellect, that is where there is the source actually of separation. So the Rebbe gives 3 proofs. The first one, just last week's parsha, we actually touched on this idea of the giving of the Torah, and of course, Yisro, Mishpatim, and we all know that prior to the giving of the Torah, the Jews were we only reached it once, the point of absolute unity, right? Very famous quote, when they arrived at Sinai on the Rosh Chodesh Sivan, on the first day of Sivan, they were going to get the Torah on the 6th. What does the verse say? Vayichan Sham Yisrael neged hahar, and 3 million of them, camped by the base of the mountain. He camped, not they. Our sages say, Ki ish echad b'lev echad, because all 3 million of us were like one man with one heart. Since we are the generation of redemption, we were actually there, so we can take credit as well for this unbelievable ability of Vayichan, one man with one heart. Now, on this concept, it explains that what created that Vayichan? A will, a simple will. Everybody was united because everyone had the same will, the will to receive God's Torah, God's word, God's bond with them. That was supra-rational. That was not coming from a place of intellect. Why is that important? A simple will higher than reason, because in reasoning, there's already separations. When we're talking on the intellectual plane, if me and Rachelea are discussing something, I'm going to see it like this, and she's going to see it like this. That doesn't mean we're arguing. It just means we're human. And every mind absorbs something, even people on the same team, same vision, overarching. Each of us are going to see it slightly different, because intellect differentiates. That's what it does. And we've all experienced that our entire life, so we know what I'm talking about. So how did we achieve Vayichan Shem Yisrael neged hahar? Because we weren't using intellect. Because it had nothing to do with intellect. Because it was super rational. Because if it had to do with intellect, it couldn't have happened. You cannot achieve Vayichan intellectually. You can only achieve Vayichan if you put intellect on the side and go higher than intellect to a will for God that overwhelms intellect. So this is a great proof that intellect causes separation. Clear? This concept was clear? I hope that means yes. All right. My second proof, the Rebbe's second proof. I'm not making these up. This comes from the Rebbe Rashab. The second proof. the process of intellect, this sort of actually relates to what I was saying before about Chochma. The process of intellect is to quantify and qualify things. In other words, is to put barriers around something, to put boundaries, to create definitions. Because the process of intellect, the desire of intellect, you tell me to make sure that I'm not the only one talking here. How would you define what is the desire of intellect? To do what?
Differentiate.
Why does intellect want to differentiate? What does intellect really want?
It wants to understand.
Exactly. Intellect wants to understand, right? That's the concept of intellect. I want to understand. To understand, I need to differentiate. I need to describe. I need to analyze. I need to break down. If I want to grasp something, if something has to fit into my brain cells, I have to make it small enough that I can. So if there's a person, take a very simple example. There's a person and she's enigmatic. I don't really get her, but I want to understand her. So I'm going to like break her down and try to put her in a little box, right? Oh, she's this type. Oh, she's bothered by this issue. Oh, she reminds me of this one. What I'm trying to do in essence is contain her, define her, make lines to hold her in my brain. And that's what we do every time we use our minds. Doesn't make a difference if I'm trying to understand what in the world is happening to America or why my child seems in a bad mood. Doesn't make a difference. I'm trying to understand it, and to understand it, I need to make it something that my brain can hold, which is a process of breaking things down. So that creates the separation, the definition, the boundaries, all of which seem the opposite of what I said Chochma is all about. This sounds like a Midyan quality, but it's Chochma. Third proof that Chochma, as part of intellect, really doesn't seem in the business of Actus. The third proof is, I mean, it might sound similar to what I was saying in the second one, because maybe I said a little bit too much in the second one, but it is a different idea. The very process of intellect chews things down. Whenever I'm trying to understand a concept, I break it down into its components, which again means I'm now separating. I am trying to figure out how in the world I'm going to clean for Pesach, right? It's a mere, I don't know what, ladies, 5 weeks away. So trying to figure it out. So I have to take that mass term, clean for Pesach, and I have to break it down into the rooms of my house. And I have to break down the rooms, into all the items in the room. And then I have to break that down into what needs to be done and how long it takes and when it's going to happen. That's the process of intellect, which means I'm dividing, I'm separating. The opposite of what I thought Chochma is supposed to be about, which is this fusion and cohesiveness and inclusion of everything. So we just created 3 proofs. We didn't create anything. The Rebbe Rashab gave them all to us. We just reviewed 3 proofs that support my question. My question again was, how can I say Chochma is the opposite of Midyan when Chochma as a faculty of intellect is part of the same process, as I just proved 3 ways. Any thoughts or questions on any of this?
Could you repeat the third one, please? I sort of was.
Sure. The third one is the idea that the process of intellect is by definition chewing things down into their components. That's how we intellectually understand something. We have to break it down into its parts. And as I break something down,
the second one too?
So the difference between the second and the third, and I said it might sound familiar because I just talked too much. The difference between the second and the third is the second one, I'm trying to create parameters around something, which means I'm making a box around it. And that box is separating it from anything else. The box is the boundary. This now has limits. This now I can define and quantify and qualify because I need that to hold it in my brain. That's only I can hold something in my brain if I make it small enough for my brain to hold. So I'm creating lines. I'm creating a frame around it. The third one is if I have a concept, I want to understand it, I break it down into its pieces to understand it, into its components. So the second and third are both saying intellect breaks things down, but it's for different reasons. The second is to grasp it, and the third is to be able to break it down and see all of its parts. But in both of them, intellect seemingly is doing the opposite of what I thought Chochma is supposed to be about, which is nullification, fusion, as versus this idea of breaking things down, which seems to be the opposite movement. That's the Rebbe
But-
supporting his question. Someone had a question?
No, I have an answer,
Oh,
maybe.
sure. Let me hear it.
All the things that you're talking about involving Chochmah happen in our brains. It's not outside of our person, whereas the kind of division that you're talking about with Midyan is outside the individual person, whereas all this is happening in our brains. So possibly it could go back, or even if it doesn't, it's like it only involves one individual. And so that's a difference. I don't know if that's what the
That's
answer
not
is.
where the Rebbe goes, but that's an interesting thought. I want to try to digest what you said, which means to digest it, I have to think about it, I have to break it down to the components.
Right.
I have to put some boxes around. I want to make a frame of reference. That's what we do automatically. What the Rebbe is saying, we all are very familiar with. We do it all the time.
Right.
What Toby's saying is that Midyan creates divisions between, and intellect is an internal process. The response to that would be, but even in the inner process, in your mind, you are differentiating, you are creating separations. They're all happening within you. They're not interpersonal, but it's still the movement of separation. And if this is truly the antithesis of Midyan, it has to be the movement of inclusion, not of exclusion. And that's my question. But that's pretty good thinking. So I'll accept that as an awesome thought. Anyone else have some awesome comments to help clarify this or just shed light on it in their own way?
Well, I just would have thought that the breaking down would be part of Bina and not Chachma.
Very good point. That is going in the Rebbe's direction, which doesn't negate Toby that went in Toby's direction. So it's all good. But yes, Masha, you are thinking along the lines of one of the two answers the Rebbe is going to give us. Because the Rebbe Rashab, who created the question and who supported the question, is now going to answer the question. And he has two answers. And Masha is in sync. Anyone else? Any other thoughts on any of this? All right. So let's look at the Rebbe Rashab's two answers. And the first answer the Rebbe Rashab gives is, as Masha said, that everything we're talking about is taking place in Bina. That's not Chachma. Remember how I explained to you Chachma? Maybe pre-teaching without really thinking about it much. Chachma is the initial flash, the intuitive flash, the creative flash, the aha moment. You can think of Chachma as a flash of lightning and Bina as channeling it and creating electricity. We're channeling that flash, or the more classical example, the spring, which then becomes the river, or a dot from which can come forth all these lines. So the Chachma is just the dot, it's just the flash, it's just the spring. All the stuff I was talking about don't occur in Chachma. By definition, they can't occur in Chachma because Chachma would have a lot of definition there. We said Chachma doesn't have any definition. So everything we said is true, and everything we said is intellectual, and everything there is taking place in Bina. But Chachma precedes that. So therefore, Chachma is part of the pyramid of intellect, but the real intellectual processing that creates all that breakdown has nothing to do with her. So that's the first answer the Rebbe Rashab gives. So we clean away from Chachma any trace of connection to all of this separation and compartmentalization. It's part of intellect, but it's not part of Chachma. That's the first answer. And then there's a second answer, which is the rest of this section, and the entire next section of the talk is devoted to the second answer. And the second answer, which you might say is a little bit deeper, even though the first answer is very, very true and solid answer, But it takes us a step further in the thought process, which is, yes, we could view Chochma as part of intellect. She's the seeds of intellect. So if it's happening in intellect, she's part of it. But what's the point of all that breakdown? The point of all that processing and breaking things down is to ultimately fuse things together. Think of it like the analysis to create the synthesis. The breakdown to be able to have a synergy, to pull together everything. So intellect does break down. It does crumble thing into all this little components, but it's not doing it for the goal of Midyan. And this sort of echoes a drop of Toby's perspective. Because remember, Toby said, well, the difference between Midyan and Chochma is that Midyan is doing it between others and Chochma is just an internal process. So the difference here might not be what you could capture in a Kodak moment, because they both might look like they're breaking things down. But Midyan breaks things down to separate. And Chochma and godly intellect breaks things down to pull them together. And we're going to explain that idea at length. Any questions before I start explaining at length?
Yeah, is this being recorded?
Yes, it is.
Okay,
You
good.
should see a little recording on your screen. Somewhere on
Yeah.
the screen should say recording. If you're ever in a Zoom conference and you want to know, just look on your screen, because usually it says it should be up there somewhere that it is recording. Any other questions? Okay, so what do we mean by this? Now, when we're looking at something intellectually, and this is a very interesting concept that, of course, can have a lot of personal ramifications and applications. So here we are really talking about it intellectually, as an intellectual concept, but you can also apply it personally. Everything contains within it everything else, including its antithesis. That is how everything is structured. Meaning, like very simple terms, chesed contains within it gevura, and gevura contains within it chesed. Has to. Everything contains within it its opposite dimension. Now, why is that true? Why does everything contain within it its opposite? Because everything is coming from a source within which all is contained. Like if we would look at God's divine attributes, right? So I said chesed and gevura, because that's like a real simple example of this concept, right? So we have God's kindness, God's beneficence, God's giving, and we have restraint, judgment, discipline, punishment, withholding, right? Polar opposites, chesed and gevura. But chesed and gevura are both sourced in God himself.
Mhm.
Now, in that space where they're both sourced in, I don't see them at all. Because let's say if we would go to the level of God, we're going to call etzem, atzmos, God's being. In God's being, there's no chesed, there's no gevura, there's just him. That's what we mean by etzem, atzmos mahus, the essence and being. But if I would suppose then, well, since if I could take a piece of etzem and put it under a magnifying glass, put it under a microscope, put it under a telescope, there's nothing there. There's no chesed, there's no gevura. They don't exist there. Torah says impossible. They do exist. They're just not in a form that's at all visible. How do I know they exist? Because they're going to come out and be expressed as chesed and gevura. So where did they come from? Did they just hatch on their own? They couldn't have just come on their own. It's like you look at the kid and you say, this must be from my husband's side. Where did this one come from? Nothing to do with me, right? But it came from somewhere. It didn't hatch on its own. So chesed and gevura, as an aspect of God, come from him. So therefore, even though if I'm looking in the antecedents and the roots and I'm analyzing atzmos itself, and I don't see one drop of chochma or one drop of chesed or one drop of bina, and I wouldn't see anything. Because there all you see is God himself. You don't see any of his attributes. but all the attributes have to be there in a latent potential state because they're going to emerge. If they emerge, that means they were there. That's the logic the Rebbe Rashab is using. Which means, so here we have the essence and being of God, which contains all and in which nothing is visible. And then from him, all of the qualities emerge in their most essence-like state. So I'm looking at kindness and I'm seeing such intense, absolute, only kindness. But the Rebbe Rashab is saying, if this kindness came from that point of essence and being, in which was all, and from that all, kindness emerged, you know what? Within kindness has to be the all. And so too for everything else. So within everything, there has to be everything in at least a latent state, latent to the degree that the possessor is unaware of it, completely unaware of it, but it's there. Okay, there was a little bit of a deep concept that I tried to say in a way that didn't sound too deep. Any questions? Okay, I guess I succeeded. We fooled everyone. It was simple. Great. Now, what does this have to do with what I'm trying to prove is that the process of intellect, of Chochma, which is a godly intellect, breaks down to fuse. That's what I'm trying to understand. That the Rebbe Rashab said, Chochma is part of intellect. The godly intellect breaks things down. That's what intellect does. But the purpose of the breakdown is to fuse. And now we're fleshing that idea out. So we're going to take Chesed and Gvura. And we're saying within Chesed, within kindness, within love, within beneficence is that Gvura, is that withholding energy, that discrimination, discernment. It's there. Chesed isn't aware of it at all. Chesed would deny it completely, but it's there. She's just not aware of it. And within Gevura is Chesed as well. Gevura says, no way. Beneficence, kindness, giving. No. My energy is withholding. I'm fire. She's water. I go up. She goes down. Nothing to do with Chesed. It's inside of you. You're just not aware of it. But if we break down things into their most minuscule parts, the Chesed within Gevura emerges, and the Gevura within Chesed emerges, and I can pull them out. And I can say, look, within Chesed is Gevura, within Gevura is Chesed. The two can meet. When I take out these pieces, and I can take them out because there's going to be a fusion of these two pieces, so now they magnetize to each other, the remaining Chesed is less strong, and the remaining Gvura is less strong. And now in their weakened state, they can come together. Very interesting if we would apply this in the practical human relationships or even human intellectual conceptions. Very interesting concept. The Rebbe Rashab says the same is true of everything in the world. It's true of everything. It's true of any opposites, fire and water. It's very interesting because I remember I once had a science teacher that told my students that whenever there's a fire, you always see droplets of water, and which is the water within fire. He wasn't saying this from a Hasidic perspective. And I remember then as I was reviewing the information today before the class, I actually Googled. Usually Dr. Google's quite on board with me, but he obviously wasn't aware of this fact because I couldn't find any information on it beyond that memory of a teacher once saying that in a class to my students. That within fire, there's water, within water, there's fire. Well, Hasidus says it, and the Rebbe discussed this in the Maimer. Not that fire's aware of its water component, and not that water's aware of its fire component. Fire puts out water, water puts out fire. But within fire is water, and within water is fire. And if I want to blend the unblendable water and fire, what I need to do is break down fire to all of its components, break down water to all of its components, extract the fire within the water, extract the water within the fire. Those two can blend together because they have a point of commonality. And the two remaining elements, the fire and the water, are now weakened of that self and confused. I was thinking also when I was preparing this of a famous mimer of the Alter Rebbe, where the Alter Rebbe speaks, he's explaining a Talmudic concept that probably you've heard of, an interesting idea that women usually are interested in, which just says that if in a relationship between a husband and a wife, between a man and a woman, if the woman initiates, then the child born will be a male. And if a man initiates, the child born will be a female. And this is a statement in the Gemara. It's based on a verse, Isha ki sazriya v'yolda zachar. If a woman is mazriya, if the woman is the one seeding in this relationship, then a male is born. So based on that verse, it says in the Talmud, if the woman initiates, if she's mazriya first, it's a man, and if a man is, it's a girl. The Alter Rebbe explains this in a very short, easy, and very interesting mimer in Torah. And the Alter Rebbe says there that, like, philosophers have long wondered about this concept. Why is it true? And he explains very interesting. He says, because within the woman, there's the male and female pieces. And within the man, there's the male and female pieces. We call them chesed and gvur or whatever. We just call them male and female. Now, if the woman is trying to bond with a man, to bond with the man, she's going to pull out her masculine piece. So there's a bridge between them. If the man is initiating in this relationship and he's trying to bond with the woman, he's going to pull out his feminine piece to create that bridge with her. So whichever one is initiating in this level, again, this is obviously completely subconscious. Nobody's consciously doing this. But on a subconscious level, they're each pulling out the other party's element to make the bridge. And that's why if a woman is starting off and a child is produced, it's going to be male because her energy pulled out here was male. And if a man is starting off and he's pulling out that piece of himself to bridge with his wife, it's going to be female. The child's going to be a girl. And that's why it says that a daughter has a special connection to a father and a son has a special connection to a mother. That's the source for the concept the Alter Rebbe said to the Tzemach Tzedek. The Tzemach Tzedek was the Alter Rebbe's grandson through his mother, the Alter Rebbe's daughter. So the Alter Rebbe said to the Tzemach Tzedek, we have a very special bond because a father has a special bond with a daughter and a mother with a son. So therefore the Tzemach Tzedek was, so to speak, closer to his mother, and his mother in turn was closer to her father. So you can for yourself think of your son's daughters and the special bond you'll be able to have with them or do have with them. But that's really, in essence, pulling out the same idea here, that there's the male and female element. And if I want this fusion between the two parties, the female is pulling out her male piece or the male is pulling out his female piece. So the Alter Rebbe is saying here within fire, not the Alter Rebbe, I'm sorry, the Rebbe Rashab is saying here within fire and water, the fire has that water piece, the water has that fire piece, and the two come out and can blend. And then the remaining elements are weaker, and therefore they can blend. So we're looking here and understanding this idea, which I guess we have to stop at this point, and we've finished the ice. I obviously didn't do every detail, but we did the basic ideas of the 5th and 6th section of this talk, that the process of a godly intellect does break things down. It does, that's intellect. But the breakdown is to accomplish the fusion that can occur only when things are broken down. Or to put it in really simple terms, like interpersonal terms, if you're trying to relate to someone who's difficult or just different, the best approach here would be to find that point of commonality between the two of you. We both love to cook. We could talk about that. We could bond on that issue. You know, you're both in. I'm totally different than her. She's totally different than me. Of course, you're totally different. We get that. But if you break both of you down to all of your components, let's put out like little crumbs or marbles or coins on the table. Oh, now I see that both of you have this. And from this point that you both have, because I broke you down, because there was that differentiation, because I was breaking down to chew everything into little pieces, I can find the point of commonality between the two of you. But if I didn't break you down, I wouldn't be able to see so clearly in what way, at what point the two of you can merge. So we see this idea of intellect to break down could be a tool of intellect to fuse. And that's the Rebbe Rashav's point, that Chochma as intellect does create these breakdowns. But the purpose of them is to build, to put back together on a deeper level. And that is the 5th section of this talk. Any questions on any of this?
Yeah, I have one question.
Sure.
Why does it weaken the water and the fire when you take out the water element of the fire and the fire element in the water?
Because
Why is it
in
weakened?
essence, anytime there's a piece of you that's removed, even a piece of you that you're not even aware of, it is part of you. And therefore you are weaker because you gave up that piece. Like if a person would say, oh, I have to sacrifice something. Well, I'll give you my little toe. What's a little toe? But guess what? Something's missing you now because that one little piece is gone. So even though we're sacrificing here, we're giving up here something that the being was unaware of, it still fed it. It still was part of it. And therefore it fed to its strength as it. So it's very interesting that the fire and water feeds to the water sense of water, but it does because it's part of it. So when the fire element of water is removed, the water now is a little less water and therefore can fuse with that other element called fire.
But then you're saying they're coming back together again.
Right, which is the goal. In other words,
But
water and fire, it's a little hard for us
stronger?
to fathom it because we don't relate to water and fire blending. But I think when you think of it interpersonally, it might be easier to answer Judith's question. Every piece of self builds your total self, including the pieces you're not even aware of. So if you gave up, like in this example, the fire and the water, that we're taking out the fire element and we're taking out the water element. If you gave up a piece of self, you would be less because of that giving up. Even if it's a piece you didn't care about, weren't aware of, didn't know existed in you, but it's all creating you. You're the composite of many things you're aware of and many things you're unaware of. I don't know if you ever do something weird and ask yourself, why did I do that? Is that from a previous lifetime? Is that from some childhood trauma I don't know about? But you know, there's pieces of us that come out that we don't always understand, but they're part of us. They're definitely part of us. And all of those pieces create me, create us, create you, create the I. So when any of those pieces are taken away, there's a loss. Now that loss here might be an advantage, which I think is what Elka was saying. That loss might be advantageous to create the blending that can only occur if I'm a little less I and you're a little less you, and then there could be the blending of the two.
Yep.
But it's still that point of loss, which is why the water gets weaker when she loses her fire component, and the fire gets weaker when she loses her water component.
But that blending, does that make the whole new thing stronger than the two individuals?
Yes, it does. But the stronger is the blended whole, not the individual.
Right. Okay.
Any other questions?
So, yeah, I have a question. So is this directly relating to the homework assignment? The idea that if you are bittul and you nullify some of your character traits, you sort of put them on the shelf temporarily, your desire to speak out or whatever gets you into trouble. So if you do that, so then you're like leaving a piece of yourself out, and then that creates a harmony with the other person. Right?
It definitely could. Now, what we're talking about here, to completely occur, you would need the other person to be part of this dance as well.
Oh.
In other words, there's you putting aside something, like if you have an urge that your opinion needs to be heard, and the other person has an urge that their opinion needs to be heard, we can experience the clashing of those two wills.
Right.
Both people were invested in this bittul, and both people put aside that piece, both people would be weaker, and both people would be able to blend. And as Elke is saying, there would be a stronger whole than either of those separate strong people. That now these people are more open, weaker, and creating a much, much stronger whole. I mean, imagine a marriage, right? If we're thinking of a marriage, I mean, that'd be such a obvious application of this concept.
Right. Of course.
If both people are like, the buck stops here.
First,
I know exactly what's right, what's in my brain. I always know what's right. Just ask me. I know everything. And of course, nobody else does. But that's why you have to ask me. So if you have two people like that and then they're married to each other, wow, what a relationship. Well, imagine if both committed to sacrificing that piece of self for the common cause, for the stability of something bigger than each, called the marriage.
Right.
They each sacrifice. So, well, I'm weaker. Yeah, you are. But thank God your marriage is a lot stronger. So, but going back to what Toby was saying, if you, as we were talking about in our homework, we're not getting another person on board. That would be a really awesome thing to do. But we're talking about you work on yourself. So if you're working on yourself, then the process of you becoming weaker to create a bond that's stronger would occur, but not to the same degree as if both parties were involved in the process. So it would occur, but it would not be as strong because there's another person who might or might not be inspired by your awesome example. Any other questions on this?
Yeah, just going back to, you said briefly that anything contains everything.
Right.
So it doesn't just contain its opposite, it contains everything.
Right.
Okay.
But when we're looking at that point of fusion with an opposing force, I'm looking at pulling out that opposite identity, because that's going to be that point of fusion. In other words, like going back to the example of chesed and gvura, kindness and withholding. Kindness doesn't just contain gvura. It contains neksach, it contains hoid, it contains malchus, but none of those points are relevant if I want to bond with gvura. So if I'm trying to bond with that opposing energy, I need to find that opposing energy in me. I can find all these other pieces also in me, but they're not relevant for this purpose. For this purpose, we're looking at the opposing energy that we're extracting.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Sure. Anyone else? Any other questions?
When you're extracting that part, is that physical?
Yes, absolutely. If you're doing it in oneself. When we're talking about here in this mimer, we're looking at the whole process of intellect, because again, the Rebbe's point is to say that Chochma does not break down in a Midyan-like fashion. It breaks down in a bittul fashion to create synergy, to create fusion. We're talking about a relationship between two people, like in my response to Toby, where we sort of extrapolate to the idea of a marriage or something, or any partnership of two people, then yeah, of course, that's all pure bittul. It's tremendous bittul to give up a piece of myself for someone else.
Right.
It's often very, 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 very needed. And it requires a lot of bittul. And it requires a belief in the bigger whole that's going to emerge. And because of my belief in that, I'm willing to sacrifice. Because giving up, that's what I was trying to say before, giving up anything of yourself is a sacrifice. That's why when it says in the Gemara, in the primordial term chassid, the example given in the Gemara is someone who burns his nails, right? If you cut your nails, nails fall on the ground, they can be dangerous. So what do you do with them? So you have to get rid of them in some way. And it says a chassid, someone who goes beyond the letter of the law, he doesn't just throw them out, he burns them just to make sure no one's harmed by them. The question is, why is it such a chassid to burn your nails? Going beyond the letter of the law. Because it hurts to give up a piece of yourself, to destroy a piece of yourself like that, even if it's your nail. This is a toenail. On some level, we're told it hurts. On some level, you're sacrificing a piece of yourself. You're burning a piece of yourself so another person shouldn't be harmed. And that hurts. So we could think, hey, I burnt my nails all the time. I never noticed I was hurt. Fine, because we're not sensitive enough to get what we're really feeling. But on some level, there's a loss. So, and if it's something a lot more significant than that, giving up anything is a loss. But it's a loss stimulated by your bittul and your belief in the bigger thing that's going to emerge from the fusion, from the achdus, from the unity, from the bonding that can only come through this process of my own self-abnegation.
So if you're working towards that bigger goal, then you're okay with the bittul. Like
Exactly.
if you're not
And you
really
embrace
there,
it.
then
You embrace it. Right. So imagine, let's take this away from the idea of a marriage. Let's talk right now about a group of friends, a group of women, Shea Baltimore, whatever. And you have this vision of your group really being a functional group and doing lots of great things, which would happen if all of your powers were all eyes on the same goal. And in theory, your eyes are all on the same goal. That's why you belong to the same fraternity, or you belong to the same shul, or you're part of the same women's group. But somehow it doesn't seem to work out that way, because this person wants it only in purple and this person only wants it in pink. And this wants something only Saturday nights. This person only wants it Sunday mornings. So if there's this idea of like, wait, the goal is this strong, powerful group of women that can conquer the world. If my eyes are on that goal, then I'm going to use this tool of bittul to extract those pieces that we all possess that separate us from each other. So it's a sacrifice of giving up that piece of myself. But when I do, there's a possibility of making that strong, united group that could turn over worlds. So it's an abnegation, it's a sacrifice. But when you so believe in what's going to come from it, you can sacrifice, you can willingly sacrifice.
Beautiful.
Anyone else? That's the Rebbe Rashav's words with a little application. Okay, so we will stop at this point. So we did 2 ICs, 2 sections, the 5th and the 6th. So that was good working for us. Great progress. And Emir Hashem to be continued next week. Have a wonderful week. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.